Russia has removed so many tanks from storage that we've had to completely change the way we categorize them. Before, it was good or bad, those that appeared in good condition and those in dilapidated shape, and those two categories worked pretty well in the early war. But not anymore. Today, there are virtually 0 tanks left that you could honestly call good. No more tanks they can simply grab, do some minor maintenance, and send them out to the front. So instead, we decided to categorize them by decent, poor, and worst, each one requiring more and more repairs and extensive overhauls to bring it back into operation, if at all. But making it possible to get this satellite imagery and the video overall, our sponsor, Factor 75. From the same company that brings you HelloFresh, also brings you delicious, ready-to-eat meals. With summer just starting, make meal planning stress-free. You can have meals ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie. You'll get chef-prepared meals on your table in no time at all. And trust me, it could really help save you money ordering food. I know half the time I order food for delivery is because I just don't want to cook. And that's the great part about it. It's extremely flexible, with dozens of meal choices and more than 60 different add-ons every week. Things like breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and more. So get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders using my link. Click here in the description or scan the QR code with your phone. Again, Factor 75, go check them out, and doing so really helps out the channel. As mentioned, we had to change the way we classify these tanks. Again, in the beginning, just saying good or bad was more than adequate, since Russia had thousands of tanks in storage in real good condition, and those would last them for years. However, those years have now passed. At first, obviously, as Russia needed to replace losses, they would pull the tanks from storage that were the easiest to repair and get into service. Usually that means the newest ones in the best condition, but also it could mean some older tanks like the T-55s that we started seeing in early 2023. And part of that could be explained by the fact that older generations of tanks had less sophisticated electronics, sensors, engines, etc. So that explains a question I get asked a lot. If Russia still has all these T-72 and T-80s, then why were they pulling those? But today, those easy and quick to repair tanks are all but gone. Now it's varying levels of how much repair work is needed. So again, our new categories. Decent are those that require some serious work. These are seen spread out and often closer to the front of the storage bases. Poor are those typically found clustered, packed tightly together. That and the fact that they mostly haven't moved in years indicates that there's been virtually no preventative maintenance done, and therefore will certainly require a massive overhauls and repair work to ever make operational. And finally, worst. These are tanks that would normally be written off. They are typically at the back or the far corners of storage bases, and often missing parts, like barrels or even turrets. Again, these could normally be ignored and not counted, but since Russia is getting to the point of scraping the bottom of the barrel for any tank they can get, these could be completely overhauled and used as hulls for new tanks, which we have seen some evidence of them doing. In most cases, the cost to do this might exceed the cost of just building a whole new tank from scratch. But since every factory is already busy and working overtime, they might eventually use these, just because they need tanks. Then also, just to be clear, because I know there's going to be some people who will say that we're counting even the worst rusted out hulls as tanks, there are many large sections of hundreds of vehicles that we've completely ignored. For example, here at the 1295th. Our logic was that there is eventually a point where a hull has become so rusted to such an extent and it's ate away at the metal that there's absolutely no saving it. But overall, there still are judgment calls to make for all the categories based on the best but limited information available. And again, when I say we, I mean the massive help and effort HIMARS put into this project with me. He'll have all this information and more on Twitter in what might be easier to consume. But I won't spend so much time going through each base like I've done in the past, partly because we changed the way we categorize them, and also a few of the images we bought we cannot show publicly. But a few of the main ones. The 22nd. Probably my personal favorite just because it's the first one that I ever found and read about years ago, so it's crazy to see just how much it's emptied out. From 749 tanks before the war began, now just to 180. That's more than 3/4 of it gone. And again, important to remember are the ones that remain are probably in pretty bad condition. So this base could be close to being considered empty. The 111th is another one. This image I can show is from January 2024, but we used a newer one from June that we just can't show. This base also saw roughly 3/4 of its fleet removed. The 349th is the opposite. It still has roughly 84% of its pre-war number. However, the majority of those tanks fall into our poor and worst category, and could possibly be useless. The 1311th is the Enigma that I made a separate video on. it's the only base that's actually seen an increase overall. It's up to 145% its pre-war number. However, that's almost certainly explained by the large number of garages that are heavily used. The number has almost certainly declined over the years, it's just that the tanks were inside and not visible. And now the reason we're seeing more is they're pulling them out to prepare to ship them out. And the last one of interest to highlight is the 769th. This is the largest with 869 tanks left. It's got a large number of decent tanks, but it's also the base where some 300 plus tanks have sat and packed tightly together for years and years now. Being so close together means they couldn't have accessed them for any maintenance in the last decade. So in total, across all the bases that we look at, we have 3,657 tanks. Now you might notice that's actually slightly higher than what we stated back in October 2023, but it is less than the total number of when you include what we called bad tanks, and again the reason for that is a change in our counting method. Our revised number for October is 4,383, so overall we have a large drop of over 700 tanks from our last video. And while that one number is simple and easy to digest, it really doesn't give you an accurate picture. Of those 3,657, less than 20% are in decent condition, which again alone would require some serious work. Roughly 50% are in poor, again like those ones packed tightly together that have received almost no attention or maintenance in years. And then the remaining 30%, or 1,111 tanks, are in the worst category. And likely the vast majority of these could be ignored and only good as parts. So when predicting when they'll run out, the total trend implies they have some 6 years left. If we remove all the worst, it's 4 years. And if we remove half of the poor, then it's just a year and a half. But honestly, even those timelines are pointless figures. Some of these worst conditioned tanks could possibly be overhauled, albeit at great expense and time, and also Russia is building new tanks, just not at anywhere near the rate to keep up with their losses. So technically they'll never run out. What will actually happen is Russia will just have a larger and larger shortage of tanks as time goes on, as those tanks remaining in storage take longer and longer to repair. Then finally, a breakdown by type. The newest tanks have, to no surprise, the fewest percentage remaining. The T-90s at the 22nd are now all gone, the T-80s way down, T-72s, with the exception of the T-72As, are way down. The T-72As, by the way, do remain in high numbers, however, a huge percentage of that are at the 349th and in horrible shape, possibly even beyond repair. So while it might sound like they still have a ton of tanks left, when we take a closer look at the different conditions they're in, it's pretty bad. Virtually every remaining tank requires substantial repairs, and the vast majority, roughly 80%, are in such rough shape that in normal times, they might just be scrapped.